You're listening to Beyond the Couch podcast with Dr. Sally Nazari, where we look at you beyond the couch and build ways to enrich your life, share your triumphs, achieve your goals, and most importantly, where we'll be celebrating you. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beyond the Couch. I'm your host, licensed clinical psychologist, Reiki master teacher, Dr. Sally Nazari, and I'm really excited today to talk a little bit about a really important topic that I think so many of us can benefit from. I'm here today with Ellis Edmunds to talk about self-compassion, self-love, and being kind to ourselves. Ellis Edmunds is a licensed psychologist with a private practice in Oakland, California. He specializes in using acceptance and commitment therapy to help teens and adults who are struggling with anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. He's passionate, as you'll hear in our conversation, about mindfulness and self-compassion practices, and also gives workshops on mindfulness and self-compassion for teachers and employees. He's also created 2 therapeutic games, which we'll also talk about, the Mindful Bus and Drop the Rope. You'll see links to those in the show notes. And in his free time, you can find Ellis playing basketball, taiko drumming, and enjoying time with his friends and family. So let's get started talking with Ellis Edmunds about self-compassion, self-love, and being kind to ourselves. All right, Ellis, thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to talk with you about self-compassion, self-love, and being kind to ourselves. Maybe you can get us started with just telling us a little bit about what specifically kindness to ourselves is.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, first of all. And I like to think of kindness to ourselves in terms of thinking about how you might treat a good friend or a pet that you love very much. You could think about maybe a pet you currently have or one in your past that you really loved unconditionally. And taking that same sort of love that you might offer this pet or this good friend and kind of directing it inward toward yourself. I think that's the best way to think about self-kindness, self-love, and self-compassion for me. Yeah.
I really like that descriptor. I often share with the people that I work with that sometimes we have a different standard for ourselves, a different way that we treat ourselves in comparison to our loved ones. And if we think about it, what is it that they have that we don't think we have? And at the end of the day, what that is us. We have us to love them. And I think you really highlight that nicely when you talk about, a friend or a pet in particular.
Yeah, it's very true. I think a lot of people I talk to and work with too, it's much easier for them to be kind, compassionate to others and much harder with themselves. I think we can tend to be much harder on ourselves, beat ourselves up a lot more than anyone else would ever do to ourselves. So makes sense.
Absolutely. I think if we talk to others the way that we sometimes talk to ourselves, I don't know that our relationships would be as positive as they tend to be. Or even if we spoke to colleagues or coworkers in that way, right? They really probably wouldn't do anything for us.
Yeah. I think somewhere along the line, we realized it was okay to speak to ourselves and this critical voice. It was okay to kind of beat ourselves up. But it's just as harmful, I think, to kind of treat ourselves that way as it is to treat others.
I agree with you. I think it can be incredibly harmful, damaging, and just it can really leave us downtrodden. So we're touching on the next question. I'd really like for you to flesh out a little bit. How does kindness to ourselves, or just sometimes the absence of it, as we're talking about, impact us in our lives?
Yeah, I think it can really impact us in all areas of our life. You could just think about our physical health, for example, and how being kind to ourselves can really impact, our ability to sleep at night, eating healthy foods, getting enough exercise. All of that kind of plays into being kind to ourselves and taking care of our body. You could think about taking care of our emotional state and how important that is to kind of be kind to ourselves and the difficult emotions that show up. I think it can impact our work and our jobs. I think being kind to ourselves can help us be even more successful in our careers and kind of pursue things that scare us if we also have this kind, compassionate voice. In terms of our relationships, we kind of touched a little bit about that, but I think that really can play a big role if we kind of know ourselves well, treat ourselves well. It can really help us treat others well, and help us kind of have more mindfulness and compassion in relationships. And you could even think about taking time to do fun things in your life or to enjoy your life, to go on vacations. If we have this kind of kind, compassionate voice, it can kind of lead us to a more enjoyable life as well.
What I'm hearing you describe sounds like it not only encompasses every area of our life, but ways that we can take our life from, just going through the day to day and, just kind of being on that autopilot, so to speak, and taking it into the next level and really cultivating a life that has not only fulfilling pieces in it, things that are meaningful to us, but the way that we can show up in each of those things, whether they're bigger picture, more grand kinds of things, or just even going through our mundane tasks, is in a very different capacity.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think being kind to ourselves really makes us pay attention to ourselves and to notice what our needs are, and to notice what our values are and what's important to us, and to be able to pursue those as well. Just like you might think about being kind to a good friend, you're kind of offering them loving attention and noticing what's going on with them. In the same way, you're kind of noticing yourself, what's really going on with you, and bringing that kind of more mindfulness stance into it. I think that's a big part of being kind to yourself. Yeah.
I love the connection you're making there in particular, because what might originally come to mind for us when we think about, self-compassion, self-kindness, and self-love, is thinking about some of the more stereotypical caricature ways of doing that. For example, like a spa day, or a day at the ballpark. But it doesn't actually have to be those things. You're describing it so nicely in that, giving ourselves that loving attention, the way that we would to, our pets or our other loved ones. And I think in particular, mindfulness is a huge factor in that. And I think it's where things would start. So I'd love for you to talk about the role of mindfulness in this process in a little bit more depth.
Sure. Yeah. I think mindfulness and self-compassion really go hand in hand and are very important to each other. I was just thinking about a simple example of even just, you're sitting at your desk at work for a long time, and then you notice, you're bringing this loving attention to your body and noticing that you're hunching over, or that, your neck or your head is feeling sore or tight there. And, because you notice that, you're able to kind of stand up and stretch, go for a little walk and take a break if you need to. Just a very simple, easy example of how mindfulness can play into the self-compassion. But I think it expands even more to the sense of sort of acceptance that I like to bring into mindfulness practice, which is sort of this open-hearted stance that kind of like being with what is, kind of letting go of struggling with ourselves, because I think so much of our life we can spend kind of struggling, fighting with our inner experience, trying to fight with our emotions or our thoughts. And the practice of mindfulness, I see it as really one of letting that go and cultivating more this open acceptance stance toward ourselves to whatever shows up for us.
Beautifully described. And, I'll share with you one of the things that I like to emphasize in the Mindful Monday mini-series and also in my Mindfulness Matters groups is that idea of just sort of that non-judgmental stance. It allows us to have that openness and that acceptance that you're describing so nicely. In particular, the way that carries us into that space of just sort of being, and which allows that connection to ourselves to bring on that compassion and that greater kindness from a very genuine and heartfelt space.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a great way to describe it. I think that mindfulness can also bring in just having us pay attention to parts of ourselves that we might not normally pay attention to. I mentioned sort of paying attention to our body and that whole thing, but sometimes our emotions often get ignored throughout the day. We're not really aware of how we're actually feeling if we're kind of holding on to some anger or some stress, or we're actually feeling anxious. But having a mindful practice can kind of help you get in tune with those emotions that are going on. And then from there, you can kind of know how to help yourself with those difficult emotions. So that's another big piece, I think.
I think that's a really big piece and a really important one, in particular with difficult emotions like anxiety, stress, depression, or even if we're dealing with a very disruptive or overwhelming experience in our life, mindfulness can be a huge asset and a really important, valuable tool for us. And I think it can pave the way for cultivating some of that kindness for ourselves. So what impact would you say that kindness to ourselves would have on things like anxiety, stress, and depression?
Yeah, I think it can play a big role in all of those. Just to a large extent, anxiety, stress, depression, those are kind of universal human things that most people struggle with at some point in their lives. So I wouldn't say it kind of completely eradicates these things, but what it can do is help you sort of cultivate a more peaceful relationship with these parts of yourself. So when anxiety does show up for you, it's sort of like, can you notice it in your body? Can you notice it in your mind? Can you notice the thoughts that are showing up? And then you sort of cultivate a practice of knowing how to help yourself with these things. Coming back to the pet metaphor is like if your pet came up to you and was really fearful of something, would you know how to help it and what to do with it? How to show compassion toward your pet? And in the same way, can you know how to be compassionate to yourself when you are feeling afraid, when you are feeling depressed or anxious or all these things?
I love, love, love that metaphor. I think it really makes it very clear. And it brings to mind, just how important it is to know and have that awareness. And normally we wouldn't sit there and think to ourselves about our pet, oh, this is ridiculous. You shouldn't be angry. You shouldn't be fearful. Just knock it off. Stop it. Right.
Right.
Which might be some of the scripts that we have for ourselves when we're experiencing those things. And, you're also emphasizing the value of noticing what's going on with ourselves in our bodies as they relate. We often might just push off feeling hunger for ourselves, or if we're tired, we might just keep muscling through. But when we see our pets, waiting for their food, we react so differently.
Yeah, much more compassionately. And we're much more forgiving, I think, toward them. If they do make a mistake or, whatever is going on, we're able to forgive them and sort of cultivate this more unconditional love toward them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We do give them a little bit more permission for it, and therefore we can be much more forgiving, a really important word there. So I'm wondering what barriers you believe people experience that make self-compassion and self-love and kindness so challenging.
Yeah, so I recently wrote a blog post about this, and I think there's many barriers that people show up with, and I've noticed sort of within myself and people I work with. But a few of them that sort of come to mind are that I think that we come up with this idea that we should be hard on ourselves, or we develop this critical voice, and a lot of the time it actually kind of works a little bit, having this critical voice. It kind of motivates us in some ways. I give the example of that when I was in high school, in order to study and get good grades, I developed sort of this critical voice that would keep me studying because I was so afraid of just getting a bad grade. So I was really motivated to study a lot, and it kind of worked, and I did get pretty good grades, except for the fact that I was stressed out all the time. And then if I ever did get a bad grade, kind of my self-esteem collapsed. So in a weird way, it kind of works in the short term sometimes if we're really hard on ourselves. So that's one reason people kind of continue to be critical and beat themselves up. Another one is that sometimes we have more of a caretaking approach, or we think that we can't really put our needs first. We have to always put other people's needs first. And it makes it really hard to sort of receive love or to kind of give that same love to ourselves. Another one might be just kind of noticing what messages we got about kindness when we were growing up. Perhaps we grew up in a family where we did have critical parents, or we had teachers or coaches that were very critical of us. And we kind of believe that we didn't really deserve kindness for ourselves. So that could be another barrier if we kind of grew up with that. And sometimes if we have been practicing like self-criticism for a very long time, and somebody introduces self-kindness, self-compassion to them, it can be very hard to switch gears and to try on this sort of new approach, because we've been so used to being critical, and we've been kind of using that to kind of motivate us in life, that it can feel very unfamiliar and very foreign to take on a more compassionate approach to ourselves. And then, the last one is sort of around, we feel like we have to get love or kindness outside of ourselves. We don't realize that we ourselves can provide it for ourselves. Sometimes we think we have to be kind to others in order for them to be kind to us, and then we can receive kindness. But I like to say that us ourselves really knows ourselves best. In every moment, we're able to know what we need and to respond to ourselves with that need. So really, it's like ourselves are the perfect person to really love ourselves, because we're with ourselves all the time and we know ourselves the best.
What a key point there. Often we have the opposite stance of that. We're with ourselves all the time. We know everything about ourselves, and that can take on a punitive tone for all of the reasons that you described. But at the same time, what an amazing person to bring that love and kindness to ourselves from. And I have shared your blog post about those things, through social media, and I will link to it in the show notes as well, so listeners can look at that directly. But I think you did a really wonderful job of describing like how challenging it can be, and for so many different reasons. And I think some of the things that you described, it just becomes automatic, right? And we have to unlearn that in order to be able to start learning to be more loving and kind to ourselves and compassionate. And like any other skill, it can be practiced and it can be cultivated. And along the way, I think often people might try it, and the first time it doesn't go so well, right? And then the automatic kind of kicks in. Those scripts sort of berating ourselves might kick in. But it points out again to me some of the points you were making about how important mindfulness can be in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a journey, and it's a practice, and if it's unfamiliar, it's going to be really difficult at first, but that's okay. And just encouraging people to continue to practice and practice and practice, and just notice. The mindfulness piece is like, if you can just notice when your critical voice is showing up, when you are beating yourself up, that itself, I think, is an act of love, because you're paying attention to what's happening within you. And even if that voice is still there, and I don't think that those voices are ever going to completely go away. I know even with me and been practicing for a while, I still have my self-critical voice that shows up every once in a while, but I tend to just notice it and realize that's not really who I am from a lot of mindfulness practice.
And on the heels of that, how would you say people can start learning to be more loving and kind towards themselves in navigating their life experiences?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of ways, and I think it's in some ways it's pretty individual to the person. I recommend sort of taking out a piece of paper and writing down different ways that you can kind of take care of yourself. You might think about it on different levels, sort of in terms of like your body. How do you want to take care of your body and your health? So, for example, going on walks or exercising or sleeping well, eating well, taking a bath, getting a massage, yoga, all sorts of things, for example. But just sort of thinking about what sort of practices cultivate self-love for yourself and your body. You could think about it on an emotional level as well. Sort of, when difficult emotions show up for you, what kind of things can you practice? For example, talking to a good friend or going to a support group, talking to a therapist, figuring out some kind words to kind of say to yourself, writing a letter to yourself, a loving letter to yourself. Some people like to do art or music, dance, watching a funny television show. All these sorts of things are important. And I think just kind of asking yourself in the moment, like, what do I really need right now? What do I really need? Is really powerful.
I really love that question. What is it that I need? What do I need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's really powerful because it allows you to kind of focus your attention inward and really notice yourself. I was going to say some people also find like mindfulness meditation helpful, or a spiritual practice, a spiritual community can be very helpful in terms of self-care, and having sort of a group of other people who are coming together to kind of practice together can be really powerful.
I will echo that as well. What my understanding is that you actually have some valuable tools for people to get started with that in, just a low pressure way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I have developed a few games sort of based on the type of therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy that I do. Yeah, a board game and a card game, and people find it really kind of helpful and useful ways to sort of practice these mindfulness skills in more of a fun way with like a supportive group, or you can kind of play the games on your own as well. So yeah.
That's very exciting. And I will link to those in the show notes as well for everyone else to check out and see if it's something that, they can benefit from as well. I'm just, we've spent a good portion of time exploring the different ways that kindness to ourselves can really enhance our lives, and also the way that it shows up for us in ways maybe different than how we might have imagined, just thinking about the words. And we've also talked a lot about some of the barriers that come up and how we can get started working through those barriers in order to gain some of those benefits. And you've shared some wonderful tools and tips and access to information for that. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to add for us.
Let's see. There's one practice that I like to do that is helpful, that I've found for me, myself, and clients, is to sort of taking a hand and putting it over your heart, and you can just imagine offering yourself some goodwill or an intention for wellness, closing your eyes if you'd like, and doing that can be very powerful. And sort of a few phrases that you can also offer yourself is like, I see you, I hear you, and I'm here for you. To sort of tell yourself those things, especially in difficult moments or when difficult emotions are showing up. It's sort of a nice practice of being a really good friend to yourself.
Oh, I love that. That's such a loving gesture. The other benefit of it is you can actually do that at any time. You don't need to pull out a journal or music or anything. Always accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. All that you need is always within you. Yeah, it is.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you've shared so much valuable information with us today. And I think with all of that for people to mull over and the different tools that you have, I imagine some people will want to just get in touch with you or reach out to you for more information. So how can people learn more about you and your practice?
Yeah, so you can check out my website, which is drellisedmunds.com, and that has all my contact information. You can email me. My email is drellisedmunds@gmail.com. That's the main way.
Excellent. And I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes as well, so that people can be in touch if they'd like to learn a little bit more as well. So thank you again so much for being here and talking to us about how valuable self-compassion is and how we can just get started moving past some of those barriers so that we can cultivate a life that we want to celebrate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
What a wonderful conversation with Ellis Edmunds on self-compassion, self-love, and self-kindness. Learning to be more kind to ourselves can be a really valuable way of just taking our life into that next level where we want to celebrate the things that we're doing, the ways that we're feeling, and just the state that we're in as well. And on the heels of that, I wanted to share the Code for Couples podcast hosted by Cindy Brinkman-Doyle is another amazing tool. I will link to that podcast as well in the show notes. And thanks for listening in today, and remember to be kind to yourself in one small way. Until next time, take care. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Couch podcast, a space for celebrating you. The contents of this episode are for informational and supplemental purposes only, and not a substitute for professional services. For more access to you beyond the couch, check out www.drsallynazari.com.